Elad, hi. How are you?
Hey,
Hi,
Um,
hey,
okay.
how are
Uh,
you?
are you ready?
I'm
Are
good.
you ready to talk about CSS games?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so I'm going to do it like this. Here's your slides, and virtual applause goes for you, and you're ready to present. Here we
Yeah.
go.
The coronavirus pandemic has disrupted our life in so many ways. Even for me, I just started to talk in physical conferences in the end of the year of 2019, and all the physical conferences that came after has been canceled. And in this situation in life, you maybe can be sad, but from my perspective for life, we don't have time to be sad. Life are so short, and because of that, we always need to think about how to create a good situations from bad ones. And this is exactly what I've done when the coronavirus pandemic has started. In the beginning, we have a lot more time to spend at home. And in the first few days, I was just rearranging my apartment, and then came the first weekend that we cannot go out anywhere. And I thought to myself, what I will do with all this free time? And I remember that several years ago, I created a pure CSS game, which is called Kill the Birds, that so many web developers all around the world loved it so much. And I thought to myself that in the last several years, I learned so many new tricks in CSS that now I can create a lot better one, but I needed an idea of what it will be about. And it was one of the most easiest ideas that I had in my life. Because if we are now living in the coronavirus pandemic time, why not create a coronavirus game? And this is exactly what I've done. I created this pure CSS game, which is called the Coronavirus Invaders. Let's see that it upload. Just a second, here it is. And everything that you're seeing right now is built only while using CSS and HTML. Yes, for the CSS part, I'm using a CSS preprocessor. And even for the HTML part, I'm using an HTML preprocessor. But all the logic, like when I will click in the OMI button, it will open a pop-up. The logic of the opening and the closing of the pop-up is done only using CSS and HTML. And when I will click the Save the World button, the play button of the game, it will hide the game navigation and it will open the game frame itself. Even that logic is done only while using CSS and HTML. And when I will click on those coronavirus creature, they will be disappear and the score of the game will go up. Even that is done only while using CSS and HTML. And what about the countdown? No, really? The countdown is built only while using CSS. But before you're writing any single line of code in your own project, you need to think about something that inspires you. And I don't know why I remember an old code pen that was painted on canvas HTML with this cute creature that remind me a little bit coronavirus creatures. And I needed to think a name on the game for the game and how to design the main navigation. And I don't know, I had this Chicken Invaders game in my head, and I took some other ideas from all this stuff. And when you are thinking about inspiration, inspiration is always to take other older ideas and to create from them something else, something new. And now I wanted to start to paint and to create the HTML of the coronavirus creature. Here you can see my inspiration. In the end, the coronavirus creature was looking different, and I love it because this is my coronavirus creature. I started to create the HTML. First, I created the label HTML element with a class of coronavirus. And inside, I put an input type radio. And you may ask why I'm using here label HTML element and why there is input type radio inside. This is part of the logic that we will talk about it a little bit later. But all the visual part that you're seeing here is starting with its body. We have the body, and inside the body, we have the 12 ears and its both eyes. But from the beginning, I saw that I have a lot of repetition in my HTML code, like to create those 12 span HTML element of all those hairs. And in the real game, I have 100 coronavirus creatures. And I didn't want to copy paste them one by one. And in my first time in my life, I'm using an HTML preprocessor that give you this possibility to create repetition in the HTML in a smarter way. And yes, for the CSS part, I'm using the CSS preprocessor of SAS that I'm using in the last 11 years for every one of my projects. And now, instead of doing this repetition, for example, I can write it in Pug with variables, while loop, and to create the HTML in a more smart, dynamic way. And Pug is being compiled to regular HTML, but as you can see, it's written really different from regular HTML. And if you are working with Pug, you cannot write half Pug or half HTML. If you are working with Pug, you need to write everything in Pug. And this means that I need to update all the HTML code to the new way that Pug is being written. And now I want to talk with you about the logic of the frames. Let's open the game again and we will understand the logic of this game. The first frame that I need to represent in my HTML document is the game menu frame. Yes, this is one element that I need to create to separate the frames ideas. The second one is when I will click the how to play, it will open a pop-up, and this is the second frame that we need to represent. And yes, we can put frame above other frames. The third frame is the same idea. If I will click on the OMI, it will open another pop-up. And this is the third frame that I need to represent in my HTML document. And the last frame is when I will click the Save the World button, it will hide the game menu frame and it will open the game frame itself where we are playing our game, okay? We need to represent now all those 4 frames in our HTML document. How I'm representing all those frames? I'm just creating 4 separated section HTML element. And as you can see by the class name and by the ID name, the first frame is the game menu frame. The second one is the game frame itself. The third one is the pop-up of UMI. And the last one is the pop-up of how to play. But when I'm loading this game, I want to see only the game menu frame. I don't want to see all the other frames. How I'm hiding all the other frames? In a very easy way. I'm just giving all the other frames, display none. And in this way, when I'm loading the game, I'm only seeing the game menu frame. And now I need to create some flags that they will tell me if something is open or something is closed. How can I create a flags without using any JavaScript? If you are thinking about input with the type of checkboxes, they are like a flags. Uncheck, false. Check, true. And this is exactly what I'm adding in the beginning of the HTML document. I'm adding 3 different checkboxes. And every one of them need to do different operation. Every one of them have its own ID name. For example, the first checkbox that has the ID name of Toggle Game, if it's unchecked, does it mean that I want to see the game menu frame, but to hide the game frame? But if it's checked, I want to do the opposite, to show the game frame, but to hide the game menu frame. The second checkbox that has the ID name of how to play pop-up, if it's unchecked, don't show me the how to play pop-up. If you are checked, please show me the how to play pop-up. The third checkbox in the same way, that has the ID name of UMI pop-up. If it's unchecked, don't show me the UMI pop-up. And if you're checked, please show me the UMI pop-up. But those are just checkboxes that I'm putting in the beginning of the HTML document with opacity of 0, with position absolute top minus something, and you cannot see them and you cannot click on them. And now we need a way to trigger those checkboxes without clicking on them specific. How can we do it? To do that, I'm using a very old feature that exists from the beginning of HTML. The game navigation button that you saw are not buttons element. Instead, I'm using here label HTML element that only look like buttons. And label HTML element can trigger any input that you want with the for attribute. The for attribute can be connected to an ID name, as you saw in the previous talk. And for example, this save the world label button element, yes, is being connected to the input that has the ID name of Toggle Game. You see Toggle Game here, Toggle Game here. And if I'm clicking on this label button element, it will trigger this checkbox and it will change the status from unchecked to status of checked. If you will click it again, it will change again from checked to unchecked, and as many times you will clicking on it, okay? But this is just changing those statuses of those checkboxes. It still doesn't do for us any operation. Now we need to use the status of this checkbox to show or hide other frames of the game. And to do that, I'm using here two special CSS features. The first feature is the check pseudo class. I can see if there is a specific checkbox in status of checked, and if it's in status of checked, I can use the sibling selector to select any sibling element that come after, and in this way I can give it display block, display none, and in this way I can show or hide other frames in the game. And this is exactly what I'm doing in the real game. For example, if I will click on the How to Play label button, it will trigger the checkbox that has the ID name of How to Play pop-up, and it will change its status from unchecked to checked. If this checkbox is in status of checked, this selector will now start to work for us. If this checkbox is in status of checked, go to the sibling element that has the ID name of How to Play. This is the real pop-up, and I'm now just giving it display block. And now this pop-up is open. But now you need to ask yourself another question. How I'm closing this pop-up? When this pop-up is open, this means that the checkbox is in status of checked. And now I just need to change the status from checked to unchecked. And again, the X button and the close button are not button HTML element. Again, I'm using here label HTML element that only looking like buttons. And in this case of this specific pop-up, they are both have the for attribute that is being connected to the same checkbox. And if I will click the X button and the close button, it will trigger this checkbox that was in status of checked. It will change the status to unchecked. This selector will stop to work, and we will get the display none that we declare in the beginning for the pop-up. And now the pop-up will be closed. But now you need to ask yourself another question. What is happening when I'm clicking, for example, the Save the World button, the play button of the game? When I'm clicking the Save the World button, the play button of the game, I need to do two operations instead of one. First, I need to hide the game menu frame, and then I need to show the game frame itself. How can I do two operations instead of one? And it's really the same idea if you're thinking about it. When this checkbox of a Toggle game is being checked, I'm first going to the sibling element with the class name of game menu frame, and I give it display none. After that, I'm going to another sibling element with the class name of game frame, and I give it display block. And in this way, I can do as many operations that I want with only one checkbox that is being changed, for example, to checked status. This way of written is written with Sass. You can write it in two separated CSS selectors, but it's a lot more readable to read and write it with Sass. Nice. Now let's jump for one of the most interesting tricks that I have in this game. We actually have here kind of two tricks. When I'm clicking this coronavirus creature, they need to be disappear. The second trick is that I need to create a pure CSS score. Let's talk about these both tricks, okay? Let's start with the first one. If you remember in the beginning, I told you that every coronavirus creature is a label HTML element with a class of coronavirus, and inside it has an input type radio. But I also told you that all the visual part of the coronavirus creature are starting here with this div class body, yes? The eyes and the ears are inside this div, yes? And what I'm doing in the real game, I'm doing animation for the label HTML element and telling it to move around the screen. Because all the visual part are inside, it's taking all the visual part with it. And it's also telling me that if I'm clicking on the visual part of the virus, it's like I'm clicking on the label HTML element. And because the input type radio is inside of it, it will automatically get triggered. In this case, I don't even need the for attribute and the ID name. This will automatically get triggered because the input is inside the label. And this means that I'm doing animation for the label HTML element, that taking all the visual part with it. You are clicking on the visual part of the coronavirus creature. It's like you are clicking on the label. It's triggering the input type radio, and it's changing the status from unchecked to status of checked. This status is telling us that the virus is being dead. And now we just need to hide the visual part of the virus. To do that, I'm just selecting the input type radio that is in status of checked. If you're in status of checked, go to the sibling element with the class of body and just give it opacity of 0. You see, if this input type of radio will be checked, all the visual part that's coming after will be disappear from the screen. Nice? And now let's talk about the second trick, how I'm creating a pure CSS score. To create a pure CSS score, I'm using the special CSS feature, which is called the CSS counter feature. In order to it to work properly, it's need to be found in the HTML before all the input type radio. The easiest place is just to declare it on the body HTML element. How you are declaring a CSS counter? I'm just selecting the body HTML element and I'm using the special property of counter reset. This is creating me a CSS counter and I just need to give it a name and I gave it the name Corona. Now I need to count all those dead viruses. To do that, I'm just selecting every input type radio that is in the status of checked, counter increment me the corona value that I created here. And now I need to print the total score to the screen. In order to it to work properly, it's need to be defined in the HTML after all the input type radio. Because of that, I'm just putting it in the bottom of the HTML document. I created here a div with class of sum. The text score is coming here, and the result I want to print after this text here. To do that, I'm just selecting the class of sum. With the after pseudo element, I'm using here the content property that using the native CSS counter function that just printing me the corona value that we incremented here and created here. And in this way, it's always listening and printing the total score to the screen. Because it's a very complicated example, I want to show you this in a real code example. Let's open this code pen. And as you can see, I kind of created 5 coronavirus creature. You see the label, the input type radio you can also see, it's here inside, but the visual part is this div class body. This is the big black circle. In the real game, the eyes and the ears are inside the body, okay? And a place to summarize the score is in the bottom. Div class sum, the text score is coming from the HTML, but the value is coming from the CSS. To declare a CSS counter, I'm just selecting the body HTML element and created the CSS counter with the counter reset property, and I gave it the name Corona. For every input type radio that is in status of checked, counter increment me the Corona value of the CSS counter. Beside of it, if the input type radio is in status of checked, go to the sibling element with the class of body and give it opacity of 0. You see, if this input type radio will be checked, it will go to the sibling element and it will give it opacity of 0. In this way, the visual part of the coronavirus creature will be disappear. To print the total score, I'm just selecting the class of sum with the after pseudo element to print it exactly here. After, I'm using the content property with the native CSS counter function, just printing me the corona value that we incremented here and created here. Let's see that it really works. I'm clicking the coronavirus creature. You can see that the radio button is being checked. And in this way, you are creating a pure CSS score for a pure CSS game. Nice trick, but I want to jump with you to another amazing trick. How can I create a pure CSS countdown? Let's talk about it. As you can see here in this example, the numbers are not coming from the HTML. Again, they are coming from a CSS animation that I'm doing on the content property, but it's only going between 9 to 0, not between 99 to 0. What is actually happening here? In this span HTML element with the class of count, I'm using the before and the after pseudo element. These both numbers doesn't really act like one number. It's only looking like they are acting like one number, but it's two separated string. That you will understand exactly what's happening here. Let's print here the text AA, and you will see that the numbers is being, you see one number is in one side and the second number in the second side. It's only two strings that are really synchronized, that looking like one integer that going every second one number down. And how it really works. The first value, I'm using here the before pseudo element. I'm calling the animation of countdown, this animation that going between 9 to 0. This is for the first value. And I'm telling the animation to work for 100 seconds and one iteration. 100 second, 10 frame, this meaning that every 10 seconds will go number down, 20 second another, 30 second another. After it finished the first iteration, because it's need to work for only one iteration, I want it to be stuck on the last frame of the animation. To do that, I'm using here the forwards value that telling the animation, after you are finished all your iteration, please be stuck on the last frame of the animation. For the second value of the number, I'm using the after pseudo element. And I'm using here the same animation, you see, same animation, but in a different way. I'm telling the animation to work for 10 seconds and 10 iteration. 10 second, 10 frame, this means that every 1 second will go number down, 2 second another, 3 second another. And after one iteration, it will do it again for another 9 iteration. Why? Because I declared here that it will work for a total of 10 iteration. And after all those iterations, I want it to be stuck on the last frame of the animation of 0. And again, I'm just putting here the forwards value. And after all those 10 iterations, this animation will be stuck on the 0, 0 value. And let's see that it really is stuck. Let's see it 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and finish. Nice. But let's continue to more important stuff. Random values, random values. First, I want to show you why I wanted to create random stuff in my own game. And let's play the game again. Here you can see that the location of the virus are being randomized. And even the scale of them is being randomized, and even the rotation of them is being randomized. But how can we do random stuff in CSS? We can't, but we can do it with SAS. Because it's a very important example, I want to show you this in a real live code demo. Let's see. You need to understand it that if I have 100 different locations for 100 viruses, I needed to create 100 different CSS animation. And because I didn't want to write them one by one, I used here a SAS for loop that is running 100 iteration, okay? And this created me dynamically 100 different animation. Every virus has 6 different locations in the game. The translate X is always the same. But in the translate y-axis, I'm using here the SAS random function. In this case, here is randomize me a value between 1 to 80, and I'm just doubling it in 1VH. Even for the scale, I use the SAS random function, and even for the rotation, I'm using the SAS random function. Because I don't want you to be afraid from this SAS random function, I will show you another example that it's more easier to understand. Let's see the compile HTML that you won't be afraid from it. Just 6 empty li HTML element. Nothing special, but the numbers that you are seeing inside are coming from the CSS. How I'm doing it? In the SAS code, I created a SAS for loop that is running 6 iteration, creating me dynamically the CSS selector between class 1 to class 6. In the before pseudo element, in the content property, in the string, I'm using here the SAS random function that just randomize me a value between 1 to 80, and I'm just doubling it in 1VH. And for you to believe me that those values are really randomized, the only thing that I need to do to change them is to compile the SAS code again and again and again. And to do that, I will just press here enter, and you will see that the numbers are being changed. Let's press again. As you can see, every time they are changing. And that you won't be afraid from what you are seeing right now. Let's see the compiled CSS. Nothing special, just regular CSS. Okay? Nice. Okay, let's talk about another feature that I wanted to create. After 99 seconds of the game over curtain is showing up, and I wanted to create the effect that the player can play this game again and again and again. And to do that, I understand that I need to reset all the checkboxes that was checked to unchecked. All the radio button to reset the CSS score from, let's say, from 20 to 0, I need to reset all the radio buttons that was checked to unchecked. And to do that, I added here a special button, the back to main menu. And it's not a label button in this case. In this case, I used an input type of reset. And what is very special with this input type reset, that to reset a form, the only thing that you need to do is to wrap everything with the form HTML element. And what I've done, I just wrapped all my project with the form HTML element. And now when I will click this button, it will automatically reset all the checkbox that was checked to unchecked. This will bring me automatically to the game menu navigation, and it will automatically reset all the radio button that was checked to unchecked. This will automatically reset the CSS score, and now we can play this game again and again and again. And the last question that you need to ask yourself, how can I know exactly when to put this game over curtain? And this is one of the most easiest tricks. Everyone know that animation have animation duration. This is telling the animation how much time it need to take from the start until the end. But what we are forgetting that we have the animation delay value that telling the animation after how much time you want it to be start. And in the real game, I have here something like 99 seconds. For this example, I only put here 5 seconds that we don't need to wait 99 seconds. And let's see that it really works. Let's refresh the screen and we will count together between 1 to 5. Let's refresh. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Game over. Nice. We saw here a lot of CSS tricks that with them you can create a pure CSS game. And maybe you are thinking that this is the main key takeaway, but it isn't. The most important things that I want you to take from this talk is to create your own project for fun. And why it's so important to create your own project for fun? Because this is the best way to learn your stuff. You know, in the animal kingdom, small kittens, they are like hunting each other, and when they are big, they know how to hunt. But we as adults, we're starting to learn things in the hard way, in the boring way. Instead of creating our own project, enjoying them in the way we are learning new stuff. If we are learning new stuff, we're getting to be a lot better web developers. If we are better web developers, in the end, we are getting better salary. And even this is not important because the most important thing in life is to have fun. Create your own project because you can. Before we finish, my friend, I'm Elad Shechter. I'm a CSS HTML architect at Upright. Upright is an open source, Firebase alternative. I'm doing a lot of CSS stuff, mostly CSS architecture. I'm writing a lot of articles. You can follow me via Twitter. I'm only tweeting CSS stuff. You can see my articles in Medium, the CodePen you can see there. If you want the slide, you can QR them with your smartphone. And my friends, thank you very much for listening.
Okay, thank you a lot. Virtual
Thank you so
applause.
much.
Thank you. You were right. You were almost exact in the timing, so nice job here. We have a few questions here, so let me change the screen for Q&A, and let me start with um, fun question, but whatever. Can I find the game on Steam?
No. But a good question.
Well, you have to think about it. Maybe it's a good thing
I
to
don't know. Believe me, I don't know
implement.
how to do it.
Okay,
Cool.
Glafira, you're next to pick
Yeah,
first.
then actually, there are many questions. That's nice. I'm really proud of my colleagues. So the next one would be, um, thank you for the speech. And are there any things or tricks you have learned during the development that might be applied to everyday development?
Yes, yes. I think it's something that I didn't think about it, but someone that saw my talk told me that if you, let's say, you have a lot of checkboxes and you want to give the user, let's say, a count of all those elements. To count all those elements, let's say you are allowed only to check 6 checkbox from 20, okay, the maximum. Then you can count them with the CSS. It's nice. You can count those checkboxes. You cannot disable them, but you can count them and to show them that you have now, you picked 6 from 6.
Cool, cool. Actually, for me, it was from your talk, it was a kind of joke, but still about the using for attribute for for inputs and labels to connect them in our web practices. It's pretty. I don't know. Developers just forgot about it. So
I,
yeah,
well, a lot of the stuff that I'm doing here is a bad practice to use. Don't use label for buttons. Yes, it's a bad
yeah.
practice. Yes, just saying, just saying. It's not to
Yeah,
use
they
them in the
discussed
daily.
it. They discussed it in chat, like after they talk about the accessibility of the web forms and so on. You're just providing us these solutions, and we're like, oh, We can do this definitely.
And there is another thing that you can use in your day to day. If you have a form and you want to reset it, you can use this input type reset, or you can write button type reset. It's the same. And in this way, you can reset a form. People forget that
Yeah,
this form element is exists, I think.
true. And use a lot of JavaScript to reset the form.
Yes, I remember that in when I was 4 year web developer, that I needed to create a button of reset, and I was going element and reset it instead of using this button.
True, true.
Yeah.
So the
Okay,
next one.
next one. Let's go with that one. Is there any advice you can get about inspiration on something complex and creative as pure CSS coding?
Is
Some
there ask it again that I will understand exactly?
Is there any advice you could give about getting inspiration in something as complex as and creative as pure CSS coding? So where do you get your inspiration,
Yeah.
basically?
Well, I can say that I'm really bad in inspiration. Really, I think one of the most hard thing in web development is if you are creating your own project is inspiration. It's not to creating the code. It's to think about ideas. This is was one of the most easiest ideas that really I had in my life, because I was stuck in the pandemic in my house, and I really thought to myself what I will do. And I remember a pure CSS game, and what I will do, I create a Corona game. I'm not good in creating a lot of ideas, but maybe there is a lot of places I forgot how they call this. There is a website that's showing you a lot of painting, and you can start maybe to create painting. There is lots of people that make painting in CSS, and maybe a lot of looking around to see on Twitter stuff and to think about how they doing one thing, and maybe you can do from the same idea but from another thing. As I told you, it's like we are thinking that we are copying stuff from people, but if you are not doing exactly the same, it's inspiration,
It's
because
an art.
everything that is exists in this world, everything that people created is built on something that they saw in the past. Everything. Tell me everything, and I will show you how it's being connected to other stuff.
Cool. Thank you.
We cannot create stuff that we don't see. It's like this is how it works.
True, true. Are we going to ask the last question?
I
Do we have
think
time?
we have two questions, and we
Oh,
still
really?
have time. I'm enjoying the
Okay.
conversation, so let's continue that with that. Why not?
Okay. Let me ask you the next one. Can I use such CSS hacks inside of some email layout?
In the
Do
layout.
counters work there?
Those in the browser, CSS counter works, but I don't know if in Outlook 2003 it will work. Yeah, I'm not sure what is working in Outlook. To tell you the truth, sometimes people tell you, you are good in CSS. Maybe you can help us with emails. No, I can't. I cannot. It's all the bad practices. You need to know how you done CSS in 1999. Yeah, I don't know how they do their CSS, and one of the hardest things is to create an email things, and I don't know how to create email things. If someone know it, it can be the best talk.
Yeah, that's for sure. So true. And I think that would be our last question is like more technical. How do you trigger your animation start only after a click on start the game?
And
So
this is one of the one of the wow. This is a really good question. This is one of the best question I need to say. Uh,
I know who'll give a prize.
yeah,
the, and you don't know how much it's easy to trigger animation, because I have the game frame. Yes, this is the game frame where I'm playing the game. Yes, and it's with display none when I'm loading the game. Yes, I see the game menu navigation first. Yes, and the game frame is closed with display none. And when you have animation in display none element and you give it now display block, the animation is starting.
it's
So
just
easy.
CSS.
Easy.
I thought how we will solve this problem, and it just worked. I thought to myself, oh, great. I didn't
Nice.
need to do anything. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. It's just the CSS magic. We
And
have
if, and if you are doing display none again and display block again, start again from scratch.
That's so cool. So I think that's it. Again, virtual applause goes to you, Elad. Thank you so much for participation in our local online meetup
Yeah,
event.
it was my pleasure.
Um, and I think we are going to wrap up with our meetup. So thank you again.